Hello and welcome to the Wildcard Rewind podcast. The draft is in the books. Let's have a look this week at some of the best and worst landing spots and the fancy implications for 2024.
I just wanna rewind to when we were young at heart. Back to all those good times. Take me back to the start.
Yes, hello and welcome. The draft is in the rearview mirror now. I am all messed up because Hannah was talking us through a trade offer, and she's on the clock in a dynasty rookie draft, which we were helping her out with before we got started. So I've got that on my mind. But we are back, all three of us together this week. So it is the best three of the Wildcard Rewind, talking about the fancy implications of some of the best and worst landing spots from the 2024 NFL Draft. I'm going to start off by welcoming in the marathon man himself. Paul, how are you doing?
Super good. My legs feel like normal now. I'm finally coming back down to earth, and it's draft season, and I'm excited.
What more could you want? And you ended up with the guy that you wanted for basically the last 6 months. It actually happened with MHJ going to the Cardinals.
Mate, could you ask for two better weekends? Weekend 1, run the London Marathon. Weekend 2, MHJ. You know what I mean? The rest of the year's got a lot to live up to.
The Cardinals draft was amazing as well. I think it was one of the best that I saw.
What made my weekend so much better was I listened to the show that you did on the Sanctuary last night with Mags and Rich and Tom. And you literally, you were like, oh, yeah, I'm going to take MHJ here. And then you were like, yeah, now I'm going to take Trey Benson. I was like, Lewis is just picking Cardinals players. This is like a dream come true to me. Lewis, keep picking the Cardinals players, baby.
That means they're good.
Yeah.
We also have the lovely Hannah joining us today. Hannah, you've just been on the clock. Do you want to talk the listeners through the decision that you've just made?
So it was a tough decision. I was on the clock at 1:06. We have very long starting rosters, and the decision was between JJ McCarthy and Rome Odunze. And obviously we had a very in-depth conversation as to which is best, i.e. you both said take JJ McCarthy, and I questioned you many times before I made the pick, but I did do it, and JJ is now a member of the family, so he better do well.
Nice. I think it's the right spot. I think it's the right pick. And how did you feel about
Lewis? Tell the truth, Lewis. Me and you advised her with this, and she completely ignored us. And then you had to clarify that that's what Rich did in the show yesterday. And then she went, "Must be a good pick then."
Yeah, she listened to us spout our opinions for a couple of minutes, and then we asked if we could start the show, and she revealed that she hadn't started drafting yet, in case the advice that we gave her made her look stupid.
I would say it wasn't true, but it kind of was. But I went with your advice, and I look great now, so all fine.
I think so. And how did you feel about the Bengals draft this past weekend?
I really liked the first 3 picks. After that, I felt like there were some reaches that I was a bit disappointed by. I can see why they did them, but I just think they need to be more patient with some of their picks. But I'm really pleased with Mims. Oh, by the way, our pick'ems last week, guess who picked Amarius Mims to go to the Bengals?
Oh,
this one right
very
here.
nice.
Winner of a pick'em. Yes, so I was pleased with Mims, I was pleased with Burton, and I was pleased with Chris Jenkins. So pleased with those 3. I suppose the rest is dart throws anyway, so we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, I think Burton's a really nice pickup. I haven't actually gone through and sorted through the results of the pick'ems from last week, so we will look to do that ready for next week, or maybe we'll tweet it out midweek. But let's have a little look through the big news of the week. Obviously, the biggest news is the draft. We actually, as opposed to the last few years, we didn't have any massive veteran player moves take place midway through the draft. That would normally be what we'd be talking through here. Obviously, a couple of years ago, we had, AJ Brown being moved to the Eagles while they were on the clock. Marquise Brown in that same year going to the Cardinals. So we didn't have anything massive. There was thoughts that Brandon Ayuk might be on the move midway through the draft. That obviously didn't happen. Very interesting to find out, though, that the Patriots and the Vikings both inquired about Justin Herbert pre-draft and were told absolutely not. But that means that the biggest news of this week is that Ezekiel Elliott has re-signed in Dallas. He's gone home. This is something we've actually talked about a couple of times. It felt very likely, and especially with the Cowboys being unable to get themselves a running back in the rookie draft. What are your guys' thoughts? We'll come to you, Paul. Do you think Zeke is of interest in redraft this year, or would you rather roster him or Rico Dowdle?
So I'll be honest. I think that Cowboys running back room's a bit of a shit show, really. As such, it's like I don't think you're going to be able to pick which one is going to have the good week, which one's going to have the bad week, and stuff like that. So I personally don't really want any of them, but I probably will later on in the draft when you start loading up on running backs. Probably will pick a couple of Dowdle, couple of Zeke. I will have shares somewhere of them, but ultimately, they're not really a running back room that I'm sort of targeting. There's a lot of running backs I'd rather roster over any one of them. So I'm basically out on them. But if I can sneak one towards the back end of a draft and there's a bit of value there, I think I'd probably take one just as I've got one just in case,
I think that's completely fair. I think it's definitely, if you take a zero RB approach, taking one of them later on or taking both of them later on, especially maybe in best ball, where it doesn't matter which of them performs week to week. But I think Zeke's probably going to be the RB1 there, which is absolutely ridiculous for a contending team.
I also love the fact that somebody tweeted out earlier basically saying that they're paying $6 million in dead cap this year for releasing him in 2023 and stuff like that. And I was like, that's such a Cowboys thing to do. Release somebody, then have them back, and they're still paying the dead cap space on that. And then it's like, yeah, we'll just sign him back. And it's just, such a Cowboys move.
It is. The other, there's a couple of other bits to talk through. One of the others is about another team in Houston. So shocked to hear about Tank Dell being involved in a shooting, although I suppose actually not shocked to hear about it, given the nature of how often this happens in the States. It seems like an only minor gunshot wound, which does sound like a little bit of a contradiction. Hannah, do you think this could have any implications for him going into the season as he recovers from the injury that took him out in the 2023 season? Is it going to affect the way that you're potentially looking to draft him?
No, I don't think so. I think, he's already got the fracture, which I think for me does knock him ever so slightly. We're still 4 months away, really, from the start of the season, aren't we? So I think anything from this is likely to have resolved. It's not like Brian Robinson, where obviously he had the bullet right through his quad, didn't he? Or somewhere on his leg, which I think obviously is going to have much bigger implications than, by the sounds of it, Tank Dell's injuries, although we actually don't know what area of his body was affected. But I suspect, based on what we know so far, he should be fully healed by then. But obviously, if further information comes out, then that may change a little.
Yeah, I think I agree that I don't think it's not the sort of situation where you want to go and sell Tank Dell when we don't know anything about it just yet. But it could be an interesting one to keep an eye on. And then the other thing, which has broken in the last 20 minutes to half an hour to an hour, is that Travis Kelce has signed a contract extension. So it's adding 2 years and 34.25 million to the 2 years that were remaining on his old deal. So he'll be signed through 2027 when he'll be 38. We're still waiting for the in-depth numbers to come out. It is interesting to note when it comes to these extensions that aren't really extensions. Tom Pelissero mentioned in his tweet announcing it that Kelce now has guaranteed money in 2024. So if that is implying that that's the only year he has guaranteed money, this actually could be something where it's about setting things up, getting ready for him to retire, so that it actually affects the Chiefs less, which is interesting, having an extension come through and the initial reaction being this could mean that he might be about to retire. But does this make? I'll open the floor to either of you. Does this news of him extending his deal, ignoring the fact that it could potentially mean that they're trying to sort things out ready for retirement, does this make you more into him in 2024, or does it not really change your opinions on him?
Ladies
You're not
first.
Oh.
Ladies first.
I personally, it doesn't change my opinion. Like, we already know that Kelsey, everyone loves him on the team. They want him to play. They really, really value him, particularly in the playoffs. I think he is getting older. I still think they're going to give him more rest in season and then really try and push him for the playoffs. So it doesn't really change my thoughts personally. I'm less keen on Kelsey from a fantasy perspective this year because, just like I said, I really feel like they're going to do similar to what they did last year. Now, I know that he had in the pre-season or just before the season started, or the first game, I can't remember which one it was, he injured his knee, didn't he? And I think that probably did bother him for most of the season. So it might not be the case like that this season, although he's getting older, he could get other injuries. I still think they're going to give him a chance. They're not going to get him on the field as often. I really don't believe that. So I feel less confident in him in fantasy than I have in previous seasons.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair. And I think the nature of it is that we know that the Chiefs are going to make a playoff run every single season that Patrick Mahomes is healthy. So it's in their best interest not to risk Travis Kelce's health now that he's 34. So I can understand why, the upside is still there for him, but it's more likely to come in the end of the season. Did you have any other thoughts, Paul?
No, I'm sort of similar. I'm exactly where I was with him, to be honest. I still think, in my opinion, I still think he's somebody that I class as like a top 5 tight end any season, and I think, if anything, agreeing with what Hannah's saying, I don't think he's somebody that he's quite going to be that tight end one. I think he's there or thereabouts, but I think they do sort of reserve him a little bit more, his age more than anything. And like you said, if they can keep him healthy and keep him off the field and win games and go to the playoffs and then unleash him in the playoffs, he's somebody that, as we've seen this year, he's somebody that can take the Chiefs to a Super Bowl, And if you can keep him healthy, then unleash him. If you unleash him week 1, there's a good chance by sort of week 8, 9, he's starting to break a little bit. And that's, I say he's old because he's still actually 3 years younger than me. But, in football sort of terms, he is getting on. He is at the latter stage of his career. And we see this with wide receivers. We see this with any position. They get to that point where they sort of start taking that step back, start winding down towards retirement, at the age of 34, winding down towards retirement, sort of taking it a bit easier. But I still think he's somebody that, with this tight end landscape, he is still a tight end that can finish. He could still finish as a tight end 1. But,
Yeah.
I think on a down season, he's still going to be within the top 5 tight ends. So I think he's exactly the same. I think Dynasty, I probably have a better feeling about him, and sort of he's somebody that I'd quite happily take in startups in a win now team and go, do you know what? He's probably going to be there for the next 2 years, and I'm quite happy to pull the trigger on him,
Yeah, and I think if anything as well, if you own Kelsey on a rebuilding team, this has potentially opened up a little bit of a sell window, because previously you could get absolutely nothing for him. Although him and Derrick Henry and a lot of these win now assets that are slightly older, it makes more sense to sell them in season when people remember how good they are. So let's get on to our main segment today. So we are looking at the landing spots from the 2024 NFL draft. How much, before we get into it, how much did you guys get to watch? I only managed to watch day 3 because I was at my brother's wedding from Thursday morning through to Saturday at like 5 p.m. The wedding was only one day. It wasn't a 3-day long wedding, because I said this to someone at work earlier today and they were like, "Oh, so what different ceremonies did you have throughout then? Is that a Jewish thing?" And I was like, no, I just mean like we got there earlier and left later. But it meant that I only got full degenerate hours of watching day 3. But Hannah, did you manage to watch anything more? Did you enjoy the draft over the weekend?
Yeah, I watched it all, and I didn't watch it all in real time. I went to bed and got up early on Thursday morning, and then basically kind of fast forwarded the chatty bits, and then just watched all of the picks. I like seeing them picked. I like them going up, getting the shirts and all that. I think that just is quite fun, isn't it? And then there are little interviews and stuff just to get an idea of who the player is a little bit more. And then day 2, I did the same. And actually, with that one, I also watched the athletics YouTube one as well. So I'd watched the pick, then I'd watched them, then I watched the pick. So that was quite fun. Day 3, I managed to get through to the end of round 6, and then I was like, right, that's me done. Yeah. Round 7, I'm not, I've no idea who these guys are now, so I'm good with that. And then they were like playing up with puppies and stuff on the NFL broadcast. I was like, nope, I'm done now, thank you. So I managed most of it though.
They're admitting to you that the draft is no longer important. When they start doing other things to keep themselves entertained, as opposed to watching the picks, they're telling you that this doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah, so I took their lead and I turned it off at that point.
Completely fair. How about you, Paul? How much did you manage to watch?
None of it, mate. Absolutely none of it. I followed it all on the app, but I was really good, and I joined the Fantasy Wildcard Twitter space or X space or whatever you want to call it. I joined that on my way to work, so I joined in at 1 o'clock, and it was actually on there when the Cardinals made the greatest pick of all time in MHJ. So I got to chat to Kev, George, and Gary on that for an hour or so. But I've been in work Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and because of my job and the time that I work, I'm up and I'm able to watch. I'm able to keep track of it live. Like I was in work at 2 o'clock Friday morning, so I was obviously watching round 1, well, keeping track of round 1 in real time, and then the same with round 2, and then I didn't get any of round 3 because I was again in work and stuff like that, and so it was just one of them where I was able to like keep track of it in real time and not be able to sit in front of a TV and watch it. So,
yeah, you sort of have the opposite issue to the rest of us, that most of us in the UK are well asleep by the time the draft starts, so can't watch, whereas you are wide awake but very much not sat on your sofa in front of the telly.
Yeah, and the joy of having kids and all of that and stuff. So when I get home from work, trying to catch up with something that, it's not just a hour of highlights, really, is it? It's it's a long process and stuff like that. So it was just one of them that I just didn't have time to catch up with it all. So I have kept up with it. Like I'm driving with work and stuff, and I've got it all open on my phone, and it's all on there. So I'm watching it when all the picks come up and stuff like that. So I was keeping track.
Lovely. So we're going to be looking through landing spots, and we thought the smartest and most interesting way to do this was, rather than getting a huge list of prospects and talking through every single one, what we'll do is we'll go through each of us, and we've had to think about our favourite landing spot at each fancy relevant position, our least favourite, and one that's going a little under the radar. So just to note, there's quite a few times here that we've gone for the same. We tried to just come up with our favourite, least favourite, and under the radar separately. So if there's overlap, it just makes it interesting to see where we all kind of share an opinion. But we're going to start off with the quarterbacks. I'm going to come to you first, Hannah, because Paul and I do have the same one here. What was your favourite landing spot for the quarterbacks?
Well, I did like your spots as well, but when I went on to write my choices, obviously you'd already put yours on, so I was like, I'm going to be a bit different here because we don't all want to be saying the same thing. So, I mean, this is super chalk, but I do think Caleb Williams going to the Bears is actually a pretty good landing spot. Like, the Bears really did their best to make sure that everything is around him to help him succeed. And I think them drafting Rome Odunze with that 9th pick actually just cemented that. You know, they traded for Keenan Allen. They already had DJ Moore. Now they've got Rome Odunze. Not that keen on their running backs, but, you know, they'll do. You know, Swift, he can catch a ball on a screen, or, you know, he can do bits and bobs. So I think generally they've got Cole Kmet. They've got everything kind of they need around him to succeed. So I think it is a really great landing spot, you know, and I think he's lucky that actually the team picking the 101 weren't the worst team, you know, last season. You know, realistically, it could have been going to Carolina this year, you know, and that would just be hell awful. So I think he's really lucky where he ended up. And to me, you know, for the top 3, I'd be wanting to go to the Bears, you know, so I think he's lucky there.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating looking at the difference in the skill position talent as they draft Caleb Williams versus when they drafted Justin Fields, who had Darnell Mooney and Allen Robinson as his wide receivers, and I think an aging Jimmy Graham as his tight end one, and then a worse offensive line as well. The offensive line is still potentially the only issue there. Obviously, the skill positions are looking really strong, but the offensive line potentially could do with a little bit of work. I'm interested. I'm going to come to you, Paul, when it comes to Caleb Williams. Which receiver do you think will end up being the wide receiver 1 in fantasy this year between DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, and Rome Odunze? Who would you rather take?
Oh man, do you know what? This is. I think this is going to be the hardest wide receiver room to predict. You know what I mean? I think all have got the ability to be that wide receiver 1. I think they'll all play a part. Gun to my head, I'd say DJ Moore.
Yeah,
that's who I'd say, but I'm not confident with it. You know, I think picking between them 3 is awful. I will say this: I do love what the Bears have done. There's so many drafts where they've picked a quarterback. You know, even going back as far as like Mitch Trubisky and stuff like that, and it's not been great, and they've not done anything. And now they've probably got one of the better quarterbacks that they've drafted in many years. And you know what? They've gone out, they've surrounded him with weapons, and you're not going to have that. You know, how many times have we said this about Justin Fields? He hasn't got the weapons. They've not helped him. They're not giving him anything. Now they've given him they've got Caleb Williams. They've given him loads of weapons. They've given him loads of stuff around him. You know, I think fair play to them. I think they've drafted really well, and I think what they've done this offseason has been amazing. I'm quite excited to see how it all pans out for them.
Absolutely. So Caleb Williams, it feels pretty likely that he's going to start immediately. I did notice someone talking earlier today that apparently we've never seen a rookie quarterback start all 17 games, normally because there's an injury, but obviously we did have some start week 1 last year. I actually wouldn't be surprised if Caleb Williams is the only one to start week 1. Potentially Jaden Daniels. I think it's unlikely Drake May does. JJ McCarthy maybe, but I can see them still rolling with Sam Darnold. Bo Nix, I think, definitely will, because they're not going to start Jarrett Stidham. But I'm going to come to you, Hannah. When it comes to Caleb Williams, is he someone that you're particularly interested in fantasy in 2024?
I'm usually less keen on rookie QBs. I just think they can have some teething problems. However, I actually think he's probably the most ready QB of the rookies this year. Look, Jane Daniels obviously has got that rushing, which is going to probably elevate his game because he's, you know, considered to be a dual threat. But I do think that Caleb Williams can be fantasy relevant, and I think if he's, you know, late round guy, I certainly would take a punt on him. I wouldn't be scared to do that, particularly in Superflex leagues. You know, if he was my QB2, I'm up for that.
Yeah.
Like, I think he's talented. He's got the skill position players. Why can't he be a fantasy contributor this year? I don't think he'll necessarily be, you know, a high-end QB1, but I could see him being a low-end QB1 or potentially high-end QB2. So I wouldn't be
And-
scared to pull the trigger.
And that's actually, I've just looked up the ADP for him currently in best ball, and he's going off the board as a QB 16, which immediately I saw that Trevor Lawrence is just behind him, and he's in a very similar range to Justin Herbert as well, going at the 104. So what's that, 9th round, 10th round in one QB leagues? And immediate was like, oh, that's too early. And then actually, I feel like it's pretty likely that he does actually finish above the QB 16. I feel like that's more likely than not to happen. Paul, do you think I'm going to ask both of you? Do you think he finishes above or below that position currently at QB 16?
I think that's about right. I think he could finish above it, but I don't think he goes much above it. I think he definitely finishes as a QB2. And I was going to echo what Hannah was saying. You know, yes, I want Caleb Williams this year, but I don't want him as a QB1. I'd prefer him as a QB2. If he, if his ADP rises a little bit, I think that's when I'm going to have less of Caleb Williams this year than anything else. But yeah, I think he does finish around that QB 16 mark, if I'm honest.
I think that's fair. How about you, Hannah?
Yeah, I mean, I think realistically, look, no injuries anywhere. I could see Trevor Lawrence and Herbert finishing above him, but there's going to be injuries, etc., etc. So I could still see him finishing above the QB 16, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think he probably does as well. And I think he might actually be someone that I end up with a lot of, especially if you can get some stacks in there, and the range is probably about right for that. The guy that Paul and I have both chosen is currently going as the QB 29, which I think is interesting. I don't think he starts week 1. But JJ McCarthy to the Vikings is an incredible landing spot. And I think the best thing about it is that they didn't actually have to move up to number 4 or number 5 to get him. They moved up one pick just to, I think, to make sure that they stayed ahead of the Broncos, a pick behind them, to make sure that they didn't come up with the Jets instead. But they actually, they managed to keep that second first rounder. And that was really important for them. So JJ McCarthy goes into a spot with Justin Jefferson, Aaron Jones, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, a very solid offensive line as well, quite a good offensive line. And then also Kevin O'Connell at head coach as a really smart offensive mind. Paul, do you think this is the best landing spot we've seen a rookie quarterback go to for quite some time?
No. I think there's a better landing spot where a rookie QB went and it didn't pan out. And that was when Trey Lance went to the 49ers. I think that was the golden landing spot. He had one of the best teams in football there, and it just didn't work out for him for whatever reason and whatever people think and everything like that. It just didn't work out for him. I think that was a landing spot that any quarterback would have been like, put me in the 49ers, that's the dream. But I think this year, I think that's arguably the best landing spot for any QB this year. And like you said, the Vikings absolutely played a blinder. I don't know if it was, me and you spoke about this, Hannah, last week, where it was like, all these, is he going to move up? Are they going to phone these? They've been on the phone to the Patriots. The Patriots are looking to move back. Somebody wants 4, 5, everything like this, all these trades, everything like that. And the Vikings just sat there, moved from 11 to 10 and got their guy and still had the later pick and still didn't have to give up much draft capital for it and still walked away with JJ McCarthy, the guy they wanted all along, So I think it's great for him. And let's be honest, mate, if you're going to go to a team that's got a decent offensive line and arguably the best wide receiver in the NFL, you're happy. You know what I mean? You're going, I get to throw the ball to Justin Jefferson, So I love it.
That's the big thing with JJ McCarthy, is that he doesn't have to be fantastic to be fantasy relevant. Justin Jefferson, he just needs to get the ball to him, and it's incredibly easy to get the ball to someone who always has 2 yards of separation on every single play. JJ McCarthy wasn't my favorite prospect, but I think he's very raw. I think that was the big thing. I think I can see the athleticism, I can see the arm talent, I can see the ability to work on schedule, but it was just a very small sample size, which there are quite a few players like that in this draft that you look at and think, okay, there's a lot of talent there, but I just need to see it on a more consistent basis. I think a couple of the players that the Bengals took actually fit into that category. But with him going at the QB 29, what are your thoughts, Hannah, in terms of, do you think he ends up starting week 1, or do you think Sam Darnold ends up taking the reins? And if so, could Sam Darnold sneakily be a late round quarterback target if he's actually going to end up lasting until the bye there?
I think this is an interesting one, isn't it? Because a lot of it, I think, is going to be on how JJ McCarthy performs in training camp and pre-season. Because ultimately they don't have to start him, do they? Like you say, they've got to start Sam Darnold, but they've taken him in the top 10. They've effectively taken him to be their franchise QB. So they're going to want to know what they've got in him. So I think they're going to certainly get him out early in the season. Will they get him out in week 1? How competitive? I guess my question is, how competitive do they feel they're going to be this season? I think they want to be competitive, but how competitive are you going to be realistically with Sam Darnold and JJ McCarthy? Now we say that, and I know they did really well with other QBs when Kirk Cousins went down last season. But if it was me, I would chuck him out and be like, go and learn to swim. You're only going to get better by getting more reps. But I don't know if they're going to think like that, because if they want to be competitive, then they might want Sam Darnold to go out. So I think it's 50-50 for me as to whether he starts or not, realistically. But I think he's going to be out there at some point in the season. That's for sure.
Yeah. I think I'm sort of the opinion that I think you either go, we have a veteran quarterback established that you're going to learn behind, for example, with Patrick Mahomes and Alex Smith, or with Jordan Love and Aaron Rodgers, and that works. Or we want you to see the field, because you're going to learn more than you can learn holding a clipboard if you're out there and playing. And you have, unlimited leash. You can make all the mistakes that you want. We're not competing this year. We just want you to develop. And I don't really like the middle ground of kind of, okay, we're going to sit you for 6 weeks and then you're ready. Because I think you either go, you're a developmental prospect and you need a bit more time, or you go, we just want you to learn by getting on the field.
My quick question to that would be, do we think that Sam Darnold is the great veteran for you to learn behind?
That's the issue.
I think if you wanted that, you'd have gone for one of these older. Now, Darnold, he's super old now. Andy Dalton, sorry, he's super old now and not really much of a player. However, he's the kind of guy that you would say, okay, sit behind him, learn from him. He's a great veteran. Yeah. Sam Darnold is more like a, you'll do for now, bridge.
Yeah. Or even go and get Joe Flacco. I think that could have been a great one to help JJ McCarthy learn from. But on the topic of sitting on the bench for a while to develop, that takes us on to our unanimous pick for least favorite landing spot. Now, to note, this is particularly for fantasy, because I think in terms of for Michael Penix to the Falcons, not that had to be a big reveal because everyone knew that was going to be the least favorite spot. In terms of for Michael Penix, this could be a relatively good thing. In terms of for his career arc, having a couple of years to develop behind Kirk Cousins, absolutely, he could be way more nuanced and way more knowledgeable by the time he eventually sees the field and have that chance to develop behind a very good and above average NFL starter. The issue with this was doing it at 8 overall when you just paid Kirk Cousins $200 million and you have other needs. You want to be win now. Michael Penix was an absolutely ridiculous pick. I can kind of see the arguments behind doing it, but only when your roster is in such a good position that you can afford that luxury pick. What were I'm going to come to you, Hannah, first. What was your reaction when you immediately saw this pick go in?
I just was like, what are they doing? what I don't understand, right? You've paid a fortune to Kirk Cousins, yeah? Surely that's telling you were telling the NFL we're in win now mode, right? We want to go out, we're going to win. We want to go into the division and try and make a push in the playoffs. So instead of getting someone who could help your team do that, you decide to take Michael's no one in 2024, and I can see why Kirk Cousins is pissed. I would be pissed. Like, I've just signed this contract. You've been telling me I'm going to be basically your franchise QB for at least 2 years, and then you're drafting my replacement in the first round. Like, I could understand them taking him in the second. Like, I have no problems with them taking him. It's where they took him. I was like, wow. And I didn't even. So I was fast forwarding the, watching it. They'd mentioned it, I think, maybe like a few minutes before that it could be him. I'd missed that bit, so I was full on like, what are they doing? I was expecting this to be like Byron Murphy or someone like that. I was like, like, just what? Why? I don't get it. I still don't understand it to this day. Don't get it.
I was in a cottage with absolutely no signal with just me and my brother, the morning of his wedding, and managed to get up. Twitter wasn't loading for me, so I managed to get up Discord and go into the breaking news tab and was just scrolling through to try and get. So I was reading the entire draft to my brother in reverse order. As I could manage to get signal to go through, and it was going through and doing sort of immediate reactions between the two of us, and then just suddenly shouted as I got there, "Michael Penix to the Falcons!" When I suddenly got to pick 8 and was like, "Oh my god!" It's yeah. I everything that needs to be said about this one has been said. Unless there's anything, Paul, that you'd like to add about your feelings around this move.
I think they just like anarchy.
Yeah.
I think they just went, do you know what? I'm going to pull the pin in the grenade and throw it into the draft and just watch the teams like the Vikings, like the Broncos, like the Raiders, and just watch them implode and just go, oh, well. Because that's the only explanation for it. I don't understand it. You know, there was still what? Trying to think of the tackle's name that went to the Jets.
Olu Fashanu.
Yeah, if you know what I mean, he was still on the board. Why not protect the $200 million investment that you've just paid money for? You know, why not fill other gaps that you could have, you know, to go on a win now sort of run? But I just think the Falcons, I think if the Falcons had 7 or 9, it may have been a different story. They get this 8th pick and they're just convinced we just must cause anarchy and just go, let's just implode and just not, you know, just go against the grain and just, I don't know. I can't explain it. I have literally in redraft no value for this guy. I understand the investment in Dynasty and how he could be in a couple of years' time. But I think Tom said it on the show you were on last night, which was a really good point. It was like, well, if Kirk Cousins hits the ground running, takes the Falcons on a great run this year, puts them in the playoffs, everything like that, does that the year after, at what point do they go, you know what, Kurt, we're kind of done with you now. We're gonna go to the, you know, Michael Penix. So you could be sort of, if he has 2 good years, you could be looking at, well, actually, it's going to be a 3rd year. Now, Michael Penix is 24 now, so you know he could be 27, and he's still not had a start in the NFL. You know, and it's, I don't know, it's very strange pick.
It's very strange. So on to a potential under the radar player. So it was really surprising seeing not only 6 quarterbacks in the first round, but 6 quarterbacks within the first 12 picks. And then it took another 138 to see the next quarterback. So all the way down at pick 150 in round 5, where we saw Spencer Rattler go to the New Orleans Saints. Now Spencer Rattler has been a really interesting case because are you drinking out of a Rattler pint mug, Paul?
Yeah, I'm drinking out of a Rattler pint glass. I just realised I was taking a swig. I was like, we're talking about Spencer Rattler as well. Amazing.
Been your favourite player for a while.
If you want to be a sponsor of the show, Spencer, you know, we're here for it.
We do need a new sponsor, and to be fair, he's playing on the same team as our sponsor from last season, Rashid Shaheed. So Rattler was an interesting one. He was the presumed first overall pick for last season. A couple of years before, it was meant to be Spencer Rattler and Sam Howell, and then really dropped off. Ended up transferring. So things really didn't work out for him the way that we thought he would. He went from Oklahoma to South Carolina and did play well, but not playing up to the 5-star recruiting status that he had when he was recruiting in 2019. But the talent is still there, and the Saints seem to hate Derek Carr. So I think he could be an interesting one. But I would like to move us on to the running back position. And I'm going to come to you first, Hannah. Who is your favourite? Where's your favourite landing spot for a running back in this draft?
Well, once again, Lewis, your favourite landing spot was mine, but of course I couldn't say the same. So I went for kind of the next best one, which I think is Jonathan Brooks to the Panthers. You know, realistically, the Panthers don't have a lot there in that running back room. You know, so I think obviously he's recovering from his ACL. So I think at the beginning of the season, he's not going to give you anything. However, Chuba Hubbard, you know, realistically, he's not someone who you should be terribly kind of concerned about, I don't think. And I think if Brooks can recover from his ACL a bit like Breece Hall did, I think towards the end of the season and into the fantasy playoffs, he could really be relevant for you. I think ultimately he will take over this backfield. So I think he will be a good fantasy asset moving forward. You know, that the snag is his ACL, but apparently it was a clean tear, you know, and he's on track. His recovery's going well. So I would hope by the end of this season, he's going to be really relevant. So I wouldn't take him early. You know, I'd try and take him later rounds, teens, you know, late teens if I can, although I think people might be more on him than that, and stash him on my bench until it got to late in the season, because I think he could really help you then.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair. Brooks is a player that I do like. I think you have to presume he's not going to hugely contribute for this season, but we might see him towards the end of the year. And it would be nice if we did, because he's a really fantastic running back. I have seen some people say like there was a world in which he was a first-round pick if he was healthy. He is very, very talented, and went as the RB1 off the board, although to the Panthers, not to the Cowboys, as everyone expected. And I remember us talking about, you know, the best landing spots for running backs, and we said probably the Cowboys and the Chargers, and well, the Chargers took a running back late on, but the Cowboys just ended up with Zeke again. So my favorite landing spot, this is a player, so this was my pre-draft RB1 and it's probably going to stay as my RB1 now. And I'm very upset about this because I'm going to hype up a Cardinals player. And then when we come to least favorite, I'm going to pass over to Paul, who's going to say how much he doesn't like a Rams player. So Trey Benson went to the Cardinals at the beginning of the 3rd round. This is a player that I really liked when I scouted him, a very talented player in college. He's got 3-down workhorse potential. I think he's one of the only backs in the class that does, and has now gone to a spot where the offense should be getting better, obviously with a very good quarterback, a very good tight end, the best wide receiver in this draft, and now a good running back as well. And obviously James Conner is the presumed starter for this season, but he is a free agent at the end of the year. Paul, where would you look to take Trey Benson going into this year, and how happy are you with this pick as a Cardinals fan?
Very happy with this pick. I think I think he's going into a position where he doesn't have to be a 3-down back. I think, like you said, he's got the potential to be a 3-down back, but I think this year with James Conner there, I know he's more than likely going to get injured at some point, but to start with, going into the start of the season, there is no pressure, and he's not having to be that 3-down back. So it's going to be quite nice to integrate him nice and slowly into the team. Where would I be happy to take him? I think I'd be happy to take him sort of I don't know, running back 3 at the moment. I think, until I see what sort of role he plays in that offense, I don't want to invest high like capital onto him. I don't want to be taking him as sort of in the teens, the late teens or anything like that. So sort of, I don't know, 24, 25, somewhere around that
Yep.
area. I'd be quite happy with that, to be honest, until I see more from him.
I think that's completely fair. And with rookie running backs, they often start the season not particularly hot, but by about week 4 or 5, they start to take over the workload.
Yeah.
I'm going to come straight back to you, Paul, because Hannah and I haven't gone for the same player for our least favourites, but it's a similar type of player, whereas yours is slightly different. And I have to say, this is a pick that I wasn't happy with at all. Where's your least favourite landing spot for these running backs?
It's Blake Corum at the Rams. It's I don't know if it's a personal thing because I have so much of Kyron Williams and
Yeah,
I've bigged him up so much over the last 12 months and how much I love him. And me and Mags have argued about how amazing he is and he's convinced he's shit and everything like this. But I didn't get the pick. I know the Rams do like to pick running backs and change everything there and change who their starting running back is all the time, stuff like that. So to me, I think you've got a good running back in Kyron Williams. I don't get the pick. I don't understand it. And if anything, he could be stepping into a sort of a 60-40 role or something like that. And he's going to be the 40 or even less than that. It could be 70-30. But I don't know. I don't like it as a landing spot. I think if he'd have gone somewhere like the Cowboys, we'd all be blowing his trumpet and we'd all be going to the moon, and he's gone to the Rams and we're all going, yeah, but what about Kyron Williams? What about him and stuff? And there's just so many question marks around it, if I'm honest. So I'm just not a fan of this landing spot.
The problem for me is that Blake Cole. So when I like a running back room to be diverse when it comes to my team, and the problem is that Blake Corum and Kyron Williams are very similar players, and I can understand if they go if basically the idea is, well, Kyron Williams is our workhorse, and if he gets injured, we want the same thing to come in and replace him. But if you're going to do that, why are you spending a third on doing it? Like if you're spending a third round pick, make it a complementary piece rather than making it another version, like a slightly worse version of the same thing. Hannah, our least favourites, I'm kind of grouping together because the NFL has really changed the way that they value running backs, and that's kind of similar to what I was just saying about Blake Corum. And these big power backs that 10, 15 years ago we would have loved, are really now slipping down boards. So these are players. So mine is Braylon Allen to the Jets. That Braylon Allen, I think I've spoken about before. If we were drafting in the early 2000s, would have been a first round pick, and obviously is now going to be the short yardage back behind Breece Hall. Who was yours? Because it's quite a similar idea.
Yeah, mine was Audric Estime to the Broncos. I do think that these guys would have had decent first and second down kind of roles, particularly now, like you say, that the league aren't that keen on having a 3-down guy, etc. So I think, these are kind of power back thumpers, aren't they? That I think could have had a bigger role than if they went to a different team. And I think it's just a shame. And like you say, I think maybe teams are moving away from them and that's why they've ended up where they've ended up, because they weren't taken particularly high either. But I just think they could have had more of a role. Like, I do think they have the skills to have more of a role. And I just think, unfortunately, they went to places and teams where they're probably not ultimately going to get that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the worst thing that you can see with a running back that you like pre-draft is them going to sit behind an elite running back for the Jets and good running back talent for the Broncos, but you don't want them going to an established backfield. You want them going somewhere where there's a bit of a void. Talking of which, in terms of under the radar picks, so mine was Kamani Vidal to the Chargers. Now, this was a player that I quite liked beforehand. He's very versatile. He doesn't have elite athleticism, but that's probably the reason why he wasn't taken until the 6th round. And he also played for a very small school in Troy, but he has potential 3-down ability, and is a very good pass catcher as well, although it mostly came from checkdowns, and he's gone to kind of a pretty open depth chart. Obviously, they have Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins, but they, we were very excited when J.K. Dobbins went to the Chargers, but he wasn't particularly great in Baltimore, and obviously he's come off 2 major injuries. So I think that Kamani Vidal could be worth a late round flyer. It could be one of those like the Isaiah Pacheco spot for the Chiefs, where actually the talent wins out and they end up with the role. Then Hannah, you had someone else that you wanted to talk about for the under the radar signings.
Yeah, well, I just was having a look through, and I thought that Dylan, is it Laub to Las Vegas. I just thought they don't really have, they've got Zamir White, but they don't really have anyone in this kind of pass catching type role. And I think ultimately he is kind of more likely to be a pass catcher in the NFL, and I think he could be quite a good 3rd down pass catching back, that ultimately his I suppose his upside would be kind of a White, type profile 3-down back. That would be like the total upside, but still fantasy relevant, right? So, I think there's maybe a chance. We know that receptions are kind of coveted more in running backs than carries. So I think if he can carve out a decent role, then potentially he could have some fantasy relevance. I'm not saying he's going to be a running back 1, but
I got very confused when you said a white back, because
White. I couldn't think of his first name. James White, isn't it?
Yeah, well, Dylan Loeb is white, and I was like, what sort of racial profiling are we going down this? Are we going down here, Hannah?
I couldn't think of his first name, so I just said White, but I meant James White. It's James White, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that type of profile is more what I meant. But I was like, I can only remember his surname as White. But yeah, I think potentially could have some fantasy relevance, for someone who was taken quite late in the draft. I think there's a chance that he could have a little bit of a role there.
I think, sorry to put in, I think these running backs that are later in the drafts are more likely to hit fantasy value than the wide receivers that are taken this late in the draft.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think like you just said, Hannah, he's gone to a running back room where there's not many people there to contend with. All he needs is if somebody gets injured in front of him, all of a sudden you've got somebody that you could be putting into a flex spot in your team. You could be putting somebody actually into a starting running back spot. Whereas, somebody this far down in the wide receiver role is very, very unlikely to be a startable asset week in, week out, So I love it. I would have put the same as you, Lewis. So I didn't put anything because you got in there before me.
Perfect. But I am going to come to you straight away with wide receivers for your favourite landing spot, because I think it's very important we give you your moment to talk about it.
Oh, MHJ to the Cardinals. There is no other player that had a better landing spot. He's got the greatest quarterback in NFL history passing him the ball, and he's got everything that he needs to be elite, and he is going to be amazing. And he just needs to sign that little contract that says that I can get a shirt with his name on the back. That's all I need to say about Marvin Harrison. I can't sit here and talk about him for ages, because what we've heard about Marvin Harrison Jr. on every podcast that talks about NFL football is how great he is. So he's amazing, and he's gone to the Cardinals.
Over the only question I'd like to ask you is, do you think it takes you until we get into the season to buy his jersey, or do you think you get it before he even plays it down in a Cardinals jersey?
Oh, I'm hoping I've got it for the first week of the season, mate. Okay, I want this jersey on that first weekend. I want this jersey on, and then it's going to be even better, because if the Cardinals are actually, it's true, they're rumored to be playing the Vikings in London this year.
You can see him live.
You know what I mean?
How about you, Hannah? I saw that you like the landing spot for Marvin Harrison Jr. as well, but there's another player that you like the landing spot for.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there was kind of mixed opinions on Xavier Worthy pre-draft, and I think there probably still are. You know, I think some people think that he can't do kind of true wide receiver things. Some people think he's too small, blah, blah, blah. But I do think going to the Chiefs was like the perfect landing spot for him because we know that they're going to scheme him open. You know, his issue is going to be he's small. You know, he's going to get pushed around on the line, but I just don't think they're going to let him be in that situation. I think they're going to find ways to get him free releases. He's going to be running up and down the field. You know, he's a good route runner. So I think ultimately they're going to make sure that they play to his strengths. He went in the round 1, which is the first round 1 wide receiver they've taken forever. You know, I think they believe in him. So I think ultimately he's probably going to get playing time and do pretty well.
It feels different to Sky Moore, doesn't it, a few seasons ago, where it was people rocketing him up boards because he went to the Chiefs rather than because he was a player they liked pre-draft and then went to the Chiefs, whereas this is really the case with Xavier Worthy.
I do think people will push him up the boards because he's in the Chiefs. I think people will go a bit mad and go, oh, he's definitely going to be Pat Mahomes' guy. He's going to be Tyreek Hill 2.0. And I think if you draft with caution, he is a good player. I just don't expect him to be Tyreek Hill 2.0, you know?
Yeah, especially not in year 1. My favourite landing spot was Lad McConkey to the Chargers. Very versatile player, could play inside and outside, and goes to basically a completely open depth chart. So I think the Chargers, basically any skill position talent, was going to be a great landing spot for them. Although interestingly, probably best for a running back because of the way they're going to run the ball. I'm very cautious of time, so let's rattle through these last couple of bits on wide receiver, and then we'll very quickly do tight end because I don't think any of us have a huge opinion on tight end. So my least favorite, despite the draft capital, was Ricky Pearsall to the 49ers, just because I don't think he's going to contribute a huge amount in 2024. I don't think that Brandon Ayuk or Deebo Samuel are going to be traded this year. I think we would have known by now if that was going to happen. I think him going to the 49ers is probably a good thing in the long run, but looking at redraft, he's not someone I'd hugely be into, although I do think he can probably take over a slot role in the future in that offense. I just don't think he's going to do a huge amount in 2024. Paul, yours is relatively similar in terms of, yes, they're going to contribute in the long term, but in 2024, it's unlikely we're going to see a huge amount from them. Who did you go for?
100. I went for Rome Odunze to the Bears. Again, I think he has some sort of relevance, but I just don't think it's going to be enough to be like where people are going to take him. I think people are going to go, oh my God, he's a great profile and everything like this. And he was the 3rd best wide receiver in this class. I think people will overdraft him, where in reality, he could, halfway through the season, people could be like, what, DJ Moore and Keenan Allen seem to be getting all the ball. And you have to sort of remember he is a rookie wide receiver. Rookie wide receivers don't normally step into that role and dominate. I know we've seen it with some over the past few years, but rookie wide receivers, you sort of have to be cautious with them. And I think so. I just don't like the landing spot with the Bears for 2024. And in redraft, I'm not a big fan of it, to be honest.
No, I think he's going to be a dynasty by about week 8 because people will forget. Keenan Allen's a free agent at the end of the season. How about you, Hannah? Who did you go for as your least favourite?
So I went for Xavier Legette to the Panthers, and some of that is because I just think the Panthers traded at one spot, which didn't make sense to me generally anyway, to take him at 32. So they clearly thought that the Bills were going to take him, which I think is highly unlikely. And I just don't think he's that talented. And I think ultimately, again, they've kind of gone and picked someone that I just don't think is going to do much. And I just didn't like it. I just don't really like what the Panthers do. I'm sorry. I just think they're pretty rubbish. And I think the owner's awful. And, as much as we kind of want everything to go well, and for Bryce Young to do well, I think he's just in a terrible situation. And even if they're going to try and make it better for him, I think he's ruined. I think they've ruined him. And I think it's just going to be disaster.
Sugarcoat it, Hannah.
I think the Deontay Johnson trade is a good move. But yeah, I agree. I wasn't a huge fan of Xavier Leggett. So I think I probably would have been unhappy anywhere that he went. But one player that I was a huge fan of in terms of under the radar is the same person that you've gone for, Hannah. And I don't know if it's a homer move for you, but Jermaine Burton, with T. Higgins probably leaving at the end of the 2024 season, Burton is a huge upside play. So I've spoken about Burton before as a sleeper, that he on the field, when he can put it together, and in terms of physical traits and physical gifts, could be the best wide receiver in this class. And that includes Marvin Harrison Jr. He is absolutely electric, an incredible catcher, incredible route runner. The problem is he was incredibly inconsistent, and there's lots of off the field issues. If the Bengals can get his head screwed on right, this could be the best pick of the draft. He also could be out the league within 2 weeks. Were you happy to see Burton get drafted by your Bengals, Hannah?
Do you know what? To be honest, I was. I think, at this point, why not shoot for upside, right? We've got T. Higgins this year. Ultimately in round 3, who have we got left? Roman Wilson. Yeah, I mean, he's a nice little slot receiver, but when T goes, he's not going to kind of be able to take that place. And I just think if he works, he's going to be absolutely fantastic. And I think we do have a really good wide receiver coach. I think, if anyone can kind of get his head screwed on, hopefully like Jamar Chase and T. Higgins can, I think that's quite a good room to be going into. They're both very, strong players, very talented. And I'm really hoping, I actually feel really positive about it. And I suspect that now means that he's going to do something stupid 1 week before the start of the season and get arrested, and that'll be end of him. But I don't know. I really have that. If he can stay on the field, I just have this feeling he's going to be really great. And ultimately, T can then go elsewhere, and he just steps in, and that's great. As I say, knowing me and knowing the Bengals, that'll never happen, and it'll just be in my dreams. But I just thought, what a great talent to get in round 3. If it doesn't work, look, it doesn't work. But if it does, wow. Same a little bit with Mims. I think it's worth the shot, right? He's either going to be an all-pro or a bust. Why not try and get an all-pro?
I really like the Bengals in the situation that you're in, shooting for upside. I think that's a really smart way to go. Actually, the roster is pretty deep. There's not a huge amount of holes. Let's try and shoot for players who can be unbelievable talents. Obviously, when you talk about the Bengals, you think about college connections. We had another one in terms of your under the radar pick, Paul. Who did you go for?
I went for Troy Franklin at the Broncos, and he's been reunited with his college quarterback, hasn't he? So, and I think, a lot of people were quite high on Troy Franklin going into the draft, and people didn't expect him to fall as much as he did. But I think where he's ended up has boosted him a little bit, and I think with his college quarterback, and that connection already there, he could sort of see himself getting a few targets. I think this is ultimately, we have to look at this as an under the radar pick, and it is somebody that, I'm not going to sit here and say he finishes as, a low wide receiver 2 or something like that. I'm talking, this could be at best, I think it's going to be like a wide receiver 3 sort of player, but I just don't, as an under the radar pick, he's somebody that he's a late round flyer for me if I can go for somebody like that, and he's got a bit of upside to him. So my under the radar guy is Troy Franklin.
This felt so obvious that Bo Nix had basically told the regime to go up and get him. So he fell all the way to day 3. And the Broncos moved up to the second pick in the 4th round. So it felt like what happened was Bo Nix overnight went, I can't believe this guy who I, caught so many passes from me, went for 1,300 yards last season. I can't believe he's still on the board. Go and get him. They tried to move up with Carolina. Carolina went, no, we're taking JT Sanders instead. So they moved up with Washington instead. Or I think it was actually Seattle that had the pick in the end, but they came up for him, and it felt so obvious to me that overnight Bo Nix had been like go and get me my best friend. Go and get my wide receiver to come and play with me. So that brings us on to tight ends, which we'll just rattle through very quickly. So I liked Ben Sinnott going as the second tight end drafted to the Commanders. Very open depth chart, good possibility to be the best friend to Jaden Daniels, and I like the landing spot there. Paul, who did you go for?
I went for JT Sanders at the Panthers. I think this is a very, very open tight end room. There's not much going on there, and there's not much in the way of pass catchers at the Panthers. And so he's somebody that he could be. He could see some targets this year, and I think he's landed himself in quite a favourable place. To be fair, I quite like it.
Yeah, and really, really fantastic athletic projects as well.
Yeah.
And talking of athletic projects, Hannah, your pick at tight end.
Well, mine was Theo Johnson to the New York Giants. I just think, look, he tested amazingly well. Like, he clearly is extremely athletic, which is what you want from your tight ends. And potentially, we've got a retirement. Well, I can't think of his name. I'm having a bad evening.
Darren Waller.
The current tight end? Darren Waller is obviously saying, well, I've not decided if I'm going to retire. Look, he's going to retire, isn't he? And if not, I can't see him doing a lot this year. I just think Theo Johnson's a great project, and I think there's a chance. He's got all the athleticism that you want from the position, that he could end up being a bit more involved in the receiving work than necessarily we totally expect.
Definitely. And I think landing spot at tight end is super important. I think we expected him to go a little bit earlier, but definitely someone that could be of interest later down the line. All of them unlikely to produce in year one, because aside from last year, tight ends never do produce in year one. Someone we did expect to produce in year one is our unanimous least favorite landing spot, which was Brock Bowers. So to me, this comes down from the fact that I don't think the Raiders particularly wanted Brock Bowers. I think they wanted a quarterback. They all went and they ended up with him and went, all right, fine, I guess we'll take the blue chip talent then. But they have Michael Mayer, they have Devontae Adams, they have Jacoby Myers. They also don't have a quarterback. They have Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell. They don't have a particularly smart offensive staff either. So it's not, the reports seem very clear that Sean McVay was trying to trade up for Brock Bowers. Now he goes to the Rams, and this isn't a Homer thing. This is about Sean McVay. He goes to the Rams and they have an offensive play caller that knows how to use a movable chess piece like Brock Bowers. He goes to the Raiders and I think they're just going to line him up in line. Luke Getz, the offensive coordinator, basically just used Cole Kmet as an inline tight end the whole time. And I think we're going to see Brock Bowers blocking a lot more than we would like to. Do any of you two have any thoughts on Brock Bowers before we close off?
No, I think you've covered it for me. I was just going to say, I just think the Raiders never planned, or he was their last choice sort of player at that point. And I think they didn't expect the Falcons to do what they did, causing anarchy. And I think it was oh shit, we better take him. And I don't like it. I think he's a great tight end. I think he is a great tight end, and I think he's got talent to be relevant, but I'm not a fan of it. I'm not a fan of it.
Hannah, you have a name for an under the radar pick for at the tight end position that we'll close off today's show with.
Yeah, just a quick one. Again, I don't think this is for 2024, but I think someone to keep an eye on is Cade Stover, who went to the Houston Texans. Now, he was actually the tight end on Ohio State when CJ Stroud was quarterbacking there. So obviously they're familiar with each other. I know that they've still got Dalton Schultz on the roster, and basically they can't get out of his contract until 2026. However, I think this is a great chance for Cade Stover to kind of, improve his skills and knowledge of the position, and then potentially when they've got an out in 2026, so after 2 years they could move on from Schultz and Stover could step into that tight end role. Now I know that it's not massive massively fantasy relevant because we've got those 3 wide receivers there now. But ultimately, I still think on a quite a high-powered offense, the tight end can have some useful weeks. So Stover might be one just to keep an eye on.
Yeah. And if there's anything that we learned from last season, it's that Hannah loves tight ends named Cade.
I was going to say that.
Except for the weeks where they perform well, and then I don't like them because I've not picked them.
So if Hannah next season says to start Cade Stover, don't and start him the week after.
Yeah, exactly that.
So that's going to bring us to the end of the show. Thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you to my wonderful co-hosts for a great show. Be sure to subscribe and follow us on X at Wildcard Rewind. Head on over to our YouTube channel, search for us at Fancy Wildcard. Make sure you give us a subscribe, and we will see you next week.
Take me back to the start.